Okay, recording has started. And so let me super quickly introduce Raphael. So Raphael Arar heads alternatives design at one project. The alternatives design is a team focused on collaboratively imagining, designing, and scaling new economic systems. He previously led design for learners at Khan Academy, worked on the ethical consideration of AI at IBM Research, and designed over 100 apps with Apple. As an educator, Raphael has taught media arts and theory at USC, San Jose State University, California Institute of the Arts, and the Pacific Northwest College of Art. Raphael also serves as board member at Leonardo of the International Society of Arts, Sciences, and Technology, and is a member of Carnation Contemporary, an artist-run space in Portland, Oregon. Also to say, Raphael is also an artist. His artwork has appeared internationally in museums, conferences, and galleries, including, for example, the Moscow Museum of Applied Art, the International Symposium on Electronic Art, and Boston Cyber Arts Gallery. And his design work focuses on developing transdisciplinary methods to cultivate mutual learning and has been featured in TED, Forbes, Wired, and other outlets. And currently he lives in Portland, Oregon, with his wife, his daughter, and his two cats. And a super short fun fact on how I met Raphael. There was this job posting on Twitter that I came across, which was called Postcapitalist Economic Systems Architect, which is like, okay, that's a job. It's like your first impression, and then you click on it, and then you see, okay, it's like amazing condition, 200K yearly remote job. This is too good to be true. What is going on? And so I wanted to know more about this and like also the organizational background, what made that job possible, that kind of stuff. And I think I just commented under the post and asked, hey, Raphael, can you give me like a little bit of organizational background on this? And that's how we started to talk with each other. That was almost 2 years ago. And also like a big thank you to Raphael. He has been like for 2 years, I think, big support on like in my work, my networking journey in this democratic economic planning space. And with this, like I hand it over to Raphael. Here we go.
Thank you for such a warm introduction, and thank you for the invitation to chat with you all. I'm just going to queue up my slides. I'll give a short talk. I'm particularly excited and about the conversation that will happen hopefully after. So without further ado, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. So thank you again for having me here today. As mentioned, I'm Raphael Arar, and I'll just start by saying that I've been fascinated by systems for a long time and have looked for ways to uncover transdisciplinary ways to make sense of them. So concretely, this has meant that I've often found myself in kind of a state of intersection as a designer, as a researcher, as an artist. And I've really found myself most at home in R&D spaces, navigating complex and ambiguous problems. And so I've used tools from a hybrid background as both a designer and artist, relying upon research as a through line throughout my practice in spaces like enterprise, where I helped Apple and IBM scale a design program across various industries, from transportation to healthcare. And so this meant designing enterprise interaction models for new hardware like the iPad Pro, the Apple Watch, and some of the major iOS updates. And along the way, I learned how to scale a program globally and consider commonalities across seemingly disparate forms of labor. Working at IBM Research, I collaborated with other interdisciplinary researchers to develop novel prototypes and ideas around new machine learning and artificial intelligence services that spanned conversation to emotional machine intelligence and their ethical underpinnings. And so this led to many semi-obsolete software prototypes. And thanks to LLMs, a couple of likely obsolete books. But at IBM Research, I learned how to work with diverse teams to develop transdisciplinary methods that sought to harmonize participatory design and emerging technology. And it was there that I started rigorously experimenting with art as a form of research. And some of that art-based research on emotion detection in particular directly influenced IBM's AI and ethics principles around explainability and transparency. So feeling the ongoing tension between my personal values and the incentives of big tech, I left the sector to explore a deeper, more meaningful, more personal, and more structural system education. And so at Khan Academy, a nonprofit looking to democratize public education, I explored the intersection of computing, pedagogy, and motivation in both speculative and immediate ways. And so this included how to think about motivation and the pipeline between extrinsic motivation, where you're doing something just for a grade, and intrinsic motivation, where you're doing something for, the love of learning, across not only widely different ages, but also class backgrounds. And those ideas directly help shape some of the longer term visions and immediate product releases of Khan Academy's core platform for its entire user base, as we thought deeply about the different roles of education. So teachers, learners, parents, and even school administrators. And so now I'm at one project, and I'm working on a system that undergirds the preceding focus areas and really one of the utmost personal importance to me, political economy and post-capitalism more broadly. And so at one project, I'm applying some of these past experiences to our design effort, things like platformization at global scale, shared infrastructure amongst disparate economic relations, the affordances of technology as a way of bridging socioeconomics, and transdisciplinary design methods to address complex problems. And so one project is an organization whose mission is to support the global transition to a more equitable, ecological, and effective system of economics and governance. And at one project, we believe, along with many others, that the ailments we face as a society are a direct result of the misaligned incentives of our political economy. See, the basic design of capitalism that's centered on private ownership and the maximization of profit, that's divorced from deeper human, social, or ecological values, incentivizes and generates the destruction of Earth, humanity, and eventually itself. And so we need more than reform. And our hypothesis of change is deeply inspired and shaped by the Climate Justice Alliance's Just Transition framework. So at one project, I steward a team that's been exploring, co-imagining, and co-designing the kinds of socio-technical infrastructure that can enable alternatives to capitalism to root and flourish. And my team has a handful of core assumptions that it's operating off of, namely that there have been massive technological advances that have enabled unprecedented capabilities and possibilities in political economy and collective intelligence, including things like network effects that can build power, speed, scale, and resilience. So Web 2 birthed these network effects, and Web 3 has paved the way for the potential for federated coordination. And in the past year alone, we've seen massive activity in the AI space. And so at one project, we believe that these new forms of socio-technical infrastructure can and should be applied to a post-capitalist agenda. Because ultimately, with communities, networks, individuals, and the planet, we seek to collaboratively build scalable infrastructure that can accommodate local self-determination and global cooperation to arrive at a pluriversal infrastructure. So I want to be very clear. This is a bold, ambitious mission that we have no intention of doing alone, but rather together and learning from the amazing work that's already out there. Including learning from the many alternatives to capitalism that already exist at local and regional scales, like the work of Cooperation Jackson, a grassroots initiative in Jackson, Mississippi, that's focused on building economic democracy through cooperative enterprise. The Boston Ujima Project, who created and operate the first democratically run investment firm. Rojava, a self-governing region in northern Syria, championing direct democracy, gender equality, and ecological sustainability, upholding the principles of democratic confederalism, and many more examples like them. We also want to be learning from the past, like the many attempts at alternatives to capitalism that have faced unrecoverable exogenous or endogenous shocks. I'm sure everyone in this room is very familiar with the Cybersyn project that questionably helped realize a short-lived democratic socialism in Chile in the 1970s before a US-backed coup quashed it. There have also been many theoretical visions of alternatives to capitalism that have yet to be realized, a space this network is very familiar with. So here we have visions for democratic economic planning, to new forms of exchange based on principles of commoning, to revamped explorations of market socialism. So we've been researching these models, digesting them, designing speculative infrastructure against them, and have even started to build robust simulations based on them. We've even explored the types of software that could support their realization, like this app concept for a planning application in participatory economics. For those unfamiliar, it's a model that details out a path forward with no markets, but rather a robust and iterative yearly planning process. I like to think of it as something like TurboTax meets maybe shopping on Amazon. Or speculative software that could support the realization of digital socialism or Amazon socialism from economist Daniel E. Saros, a model that considers technological infrastructure as a primary means of exchange relations through his concept of the general catalog. And honestly, we found all of this research inspiring, past, present, and future. And yes, we can spend hours, days, and years critiquing with them, and we should. But frankly, I'm just delighted that they exist and that we have and have had a set of bright minds iterating upon such deep, complex questions, navigating spaces of theory and practice. And so in doing so, the intent is not to create one monolithic economic system that can transition the masses. See, I believe, along with many others, that that kind of economic system must evolve through a procedural process rooted in the values of economic democracy. But rather, to build upon the quote from the Zapatistas, we're interested in creating we're interested in co-creating the kind of infrastructure that could help realize a world where many worlds fit. How might we enable the experimentation, learning, and sharing of tools, tactics, and strategies to cultivate entirely new forms of coordination to emerge? So how do we get there? Our method involves bringing people, knowledge, and resources together to design a people's infrastructure, tools and systems that help us work and live more harmoniously for the benefit of all. And to do this, we practice participatory design and mutual learning. So participatory design is at the heart of our co-design process, and it means that a group of people and organizations collaborate to develop solutions to meet community needs. And this process is an effort to build collaboratively, partnering deeply, recognizing a community's strengths, and meeting direct needs. Mutual learning is another key aspect of our approach, and each person carries unique wisdom, and our approach encourages the sharing, learning, and growth for everyone involved. We combine theory and practice and pay close attention to how ideas and tools take root. And so we've been coupling this approach with the bridging of two key polarities, vision and transition, and microeconomics and macroeconomics. So on the first polarity, we begin with a vision, we trial it or a portion of it, and then rework the original based on what we learn. And so we believe that this method allows the biggest ideas to evolve based on the insights and experiences of the community or group and every participant. And we're inspired by a practice from strategic foresight known as backcasting, which involves envisioning a future state and then working backward to identify the steps necessary to achieve it. So this approach involves setting clear goals and then identifying the kinds of actions required to achieve them rather than simply extrapolating from current trends. So our approach is a slight tweak, and we call it iterative backcasting. And so the idea is to imagine a desirable future state with just enough fidelity to take a transitionary step toward it. And that step serves as a minimum viable experiment with enough criteria to learn from its outcome and then kind of adjust the vision accordingly. And so we anticipate doing this back and forth to help cut the distance between the transition phases and a continuously updated future state. On the economic side of things, we believe that what happens at the microeconomic layer should inform the macroeconomic layer and vice versa. A platform needs the ability to operate at varying levels of fidelity, which is precisely why we're inspired by the efforts in grassroots communities experimenting with prefigurative tactics. We're also interested in how they might scale, including the types of phase shifts that occur when a community moves beyond Dunbar number. See, there are certain practices and economic relations that function well in small numbers, but when you become disconnected from the means of production, things, of course, get complicated and difficult to manage. And so as for the inverse, there are global challenges that span borders, like carbon examples or carbon emissions, for example, and affect communities at the local level. And so we want to consider the interplay between these scale layers and how one informs the other. So where has all of this research and framing taken us? Well, we've started iterating upon a platform concept that would enable groups to build, adopt, and use common tools, systems, processes, and agreements to advance work across 4 categories. Decision-making, so these would be practices and approaches to effectively make decisions and bolster collective intelligence. Resource and work distribution, mechanisms for distributing resources, making product and service allocations that work more justly and in ways that regenerate nature. Community building, practices that build solidarity and strengthen relational ties within groups. And power building, tools and tactics that help build people power and greater support to forge pathways for greater self-determination. So we've been calling this platform concept common. And before I share more, I want to stress a huge disclaimer. One, this is a hypothesis. Our ideas combined with what we've learned from groups like this one have led us here. And as we continue to learn, we're open to seeing a change for the better. And two, sharing this as really a way of inviting in conversation, honest feedback, and even alternate visions of what's possible. So with that out of the way, common centers on the belief that to scale and connect existing regenerative democratic economy efforts, there needs to be a growing network that has federated sets of shared agreements, protocols, and interoperable tools. And so we believe that common can strengthen, expand, or accelerate elements of the transition into regenerative economies or foster seeds that are already in motion within the just transition ecosystem. So again, mirroring the Zapatistas' vision of a world where many worlds fit, Common aims to create a platform with protocol that allows for a plurality of regenerative economy practices to coexist and interoperate. And so again, while this is our current vision, as we co-create with partners, we expect to evolve it and adapt it as we integrate feedback, perspectives, goals, and ambitions to develop a co-created and shared vision for a people's infrastructure. And the intent is to have a platform that supports a rich diversity of economic and governance practices, but enables them to coexist, a platform that really supports the pluriverse of a regenerative democracy. And so now, without further ado, I want to show a little brief tour from starting with the perspective of a community. So on the left-hand side, you'll see all the communities that you're a part of. Some of them might be nested within one another, while others might be separate from one another. And each community would have its own set of agreements and goals that determine how resources are distributed, either monetary or non-monetary. So let's say I'm part of a co-housing community. And as part of that community, we need to make decisions together. And so here's a view of what that might look like when we haven't set up a decision-making process. So There's maybe a set of recommendations based on the specific characteristics of my community that's really pulling in from this open source ecosystem of other groups sharing their tools, their processes, and so on. So here, maybe because of certain characteristics of my community, it's sharing some tools that I could use. And so I want to learn more about one in particular. So I click or tap through on member juries. And I might not know much about member juries, so I'm able to learn from it by actually seeing its wiki page. I can see the group that's stewarding it. In this case, it's hypothetically Cooperation Jackson. You can see how they've refined it, how they've changed it and evolved it over time. There's an audit trail. And if you're familiar with open source software tools, I can kind of do things that are maybe similar to like a Git model where I can download and run it directly. I could adapt it and make it my own and customize it, or I can just kind of take note of it and come back to it later. So another part of the platform might involve managing resources. And so here's a view where, say, my community has input all of its budgets and info. I can see transparent budgets, both monetary and non-monetary assets. Maybe we're experimenting with time vouchers or time banking. We also have land that's held in common. And in this scenario, we maybe have not set up the process for how we budget. So the platform could, again, be kind of aggregating from all of the rich set of practices in the ecosystem. And so after we've budgeted, we might now be able to see how resources are allocated across goals that we may have previously set, like renovating the community center or getting a new plants for the urban farm, and can see those allocations across, again, monetary and non-monetary resources, so including things like time. So many groups and mutual aid projects today still use social media tools, including Facebook, and though their values are not aligned, it's hard to admit that they're really useful. So here we're incorporating and thinking through some of the best aspects of social media, things like Discord-like interfaces, but tying them to aspects that might be more relevant and important in the platform. So things like resource contributions, event creations, offers and needs being met, and more. So I'll go back one screen and show that, in this kind of like platform operating system like model, you could imagine that there are maybe things that come default installed, but then there's this whole other world of other infrastructure developers and post-capitalist infrastructure that's already in this ecosystem. And so thinking about the rich ecosystem of post-capitalist infrastructure projects out there, another core aspect that we're imagining is something akin to like an app commons, where you could actually have a world of these ecosystem projects that are all interoperable with one another, in kind of the way that mirrors, common operating systems on one smartphone. And so while what I've shared with you is just showing the story of how infrastructure might assist a single community, you might begin to see how this infrastructure could be applicable across communities at higher orders of coordination and operating as a fractal. So that's kind of still TBD, TBD being to be designed. And so we believe that Common is a platform that has the potential to enable groups across the globe who are already building the futures we dream of, connect and share tools, systems, processes, and ideas. And so by connecting groups already doing this work, we really hope to catalyze the people power required to transition to a regenerative economy together. And unlike traditional hierarchical governance and ownership structures, we're committed to a shared ownership and governance model for Common that is open, decentralized, and community-driven. So for those familiar with the space, essentially being a big platform cooperative. So Spanish poet Antonio Machado had this quote, which translates to, "Wanderer, there is no path. The path is made by walking." And so drawing from these words, there is no predetermined path, not for this broader ecosystem of actors and not for a single organization or individual. that path is indeed made by walking, just not alone, but together. And with that, I'd like to invite questions and comments.
Thanks a lot, Raphael. I'm now going to stop the recording and then we can go into like feedback, questions,